So Jesus never told us to improve our spiritual life. In fact, he never even used the phrase spiritual life. So many people put their spiritual life in a box where, in fact, when we go back to God's design, it is meant to just be our life in general, not just spiritually, but health in every area. In today's episode, we're going to talk about how we can do that.
Ladies and gents, welcome back to the Holo Health Podcast. Just like Alex said, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about why your spiritual life isn't even really a thing. You're going to leave this episode understanding that while people may say spiritual life, what we're really talking about is just life to the full, life in every area, which at Holo Health, we talk about a truly healthy life encompassing more than just physical. It includes all areas, body, mind, and soul. So in this episode, we're going to talk about how we can improve all areas of our life, but specifically our walk with Jesus. Additionally, we're going to talk about how health is a spectrum. It's not binary. It's not either or. It transcends and it moves and shifts based on season. And we're going to end with a question that we have for you guys that honestly, you should stop and ask yourself today. So we sit down, if you're in the car, turn the music up or turn the volume up and get ready for another great episode. I've got Alex here with me per usual. Alex, how we doing, baby?
Man, I'm doing well. If you're watching here on YouTube, you're going to notice why I'm kind of doing this weird thing back and forth, because I'm honestly trying to get this camera in focus. For all of our podcast listeners who are listening on Spotify or Apple or Google or anywhere else, this doesn't matter. But we do have a video version on YouTube that if you like to watch podcasts, we have that for you too. So overall, I'm doing great, Trevor. I'm excited to talk about this content.
Bingo. Let's go ahead and dive in because we value your time, listeners. All of this content comes from Alex's 3 in 30 newsletter that he wrote. This episode is breaking down the edition that he wrote on Thursday, January 25th. You can read that you can read that edition on holohealth.com, HOLOHLTH.com/3 in 30, or you can click in the show notes below and we'll direct you to that. But we're unpacking that. And the first point that Alex said in this says this right here. It says, Jesus never used the phrase, quote unquote, spiritual life. The writers of the New Testament never used that phrase either. Why? Because there's no such thing as just your spiritual life. I absolutely love this point, Alex, because it's a core tenet, a drop down from a core tenet that we have in belief at Holo Health, which is
Right.
There's not your spiritual life, your physical life, your mental, your emotional, relational. Everything is just a part of you, your health, which really piggybacks, and we talk about in the second point. But I want to dig into this because as Christians, as followers of Christ, people who want to follow Jesus, we often hear this term spiritual life thrown around all the time.
Yeah, and I think it's a common thing just because that's what we're focusing on. But the issue with this becomes that our spiritual life is only our spiritual life. That it's this mental, private, therapeutic practice that we do for an hour on Sundays or for 10 minutes before work or in the shower, and then we go back into our life. But when you look at Jesus, that wasn't the reality. It was just your life, because we are a body, mind, and soul. And this kind of came from recently just being aware of conversations, especially in the health and fitness world. People use the phrase, oh, my body really hurts, or my body doesn't want to get into this position, or my body. And I was noticing just a common phrase like, oh, my body this, and that's fine. We have a body. But when I kind of stepped back and started to be aware of how people were using this, it was almost as if they separated, oh, my body is over here, and then I'm over here. It's almost like my body doesn't want to get in this position, but I want to. And there's almost like this dichotomy, this separation of the two. And I was thinking, I was like, yeah, my body may not want to get into it, but I think a better use of words is I don't want to get into it right now. Because when I go to the gym and work out, my body is not the only one working out. My mind and my soul are also working out too. Or when I am spending time in silence and solitude or fasting or in Sabbath, it's not just my soul, it's also my body doing that. My mind has been absolutely blown by the writings of Dallas Willard. I've been reading his book, The Spirit of the Disciplines, and talking about how the body is so central to all disciplines. There's so many parallels between your physical and your spiritual disciplines. Those are just the same disciplines on an area that we're focusing on. But we need our body, we need our mind, and we need our soul to be aligned so that we can produce the most fruit. Literally, the number one commandment that Jesus told us was that love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, basically every part of us. And we think that there is damage that happens, not physical damage, but just maybe mental, emotional damage that happens when we start to separate these. That, oh, I'm going to pursue my physical health over here, but it doesn't impact my relationships. Or I'm going to go to church over here, but I can just keep that on Sundays, then go about my normal life. At the central point, Jesus never talked about it like that. When he invited Peter and all his disciples to say, come follow me, it wasn't just this mental thing. It was, hey, come follow me with your life and do as I do, live with me, do the bodily practices, but also pray and also surrender every part of you. Health is holistic.
Listeners, the danger that Alex is alluding to is when we separate these things, we miss the opportunity to see God moving in our life. If we're only focused on our spiritual life, and if that spiritual life is in the quiet shalom of the morning or at church or during small group, then we're kind of pocketing that experience, that encounter with the Lord through the Holy Spirit in those moments, whether we realize it or not. So language is huge. Language is vastly important in the way that we live, the thoughts that we have about ourselves, the beliefs or the living out of truth that we have. And so it's not we're living this spiritual life. We're living life to the full. We're living life with Jesus, and we're limiting our experience of grace and mercy and love and truth if we only encounter or encapsulate that experience to spiritual life. Because God can move and speak to you when you're walking outside. God can move and speak to you after exercise or even in the middle of exercise. He can move and speak to you while you're eating a meal or while you're hanging out with a friend. Those things aren't necessarily what we would deem as I'm doing spiritual discipline or I'm living the spiritual life. That's because he created our entire lives to be aligned to him, to follow him, just like you're saying, Alex. So the big caveat here is, I would even say it like this. Romans 12:1-2 calls us to renew our mind. If you want to be truly healthy, then you need to renew your mind into this truth that it's not spiritual life, physical life, mental life, emotional life, relational. It's just your life. It's just your health. And so when we talk about these things, or when you are engaging in these behaviors, start to believe that God can encounter you there and even ask him to. A practical takeaway is ask God to speak to you clearly while you're exercising. Ask God to encounter the Lord or the Holy Spirit in your time with your friends or in your time eating. Speak to me, renew my mind, tell me some truth that I need to remember. And so when we separate these things, you're not damaging yourself. You're not becoming less of a Christian. But what's happening is you're limiting yourself to experience God in his fullness because of our own limitation. We're limiting that. We're limiting our ability to see that. So the encouragement, the takeaway with this is to choose your language intentionally, because the language that you use matters subconsciously because you're starting to believe those things. And health is not separate, like Alex said, it's all encompassing.
Trevor, I could riff for 20 more minutes, but I know we're going to go to point 2, but I would just encourage people to use their body more in their spiritual life and use their spiritual life more in their bodily pursuits, and they will experience a greater fullness, a greater abundance, and a greater power. It's why the New Testament writers said, let's lay our hands and pray on them, or get on your knees and open up your hands, because your bodily posture or what you're doing with your physical actions represents what is going on inside, because it is holistic in every part of you. There's a whole scholarly theology behind that, but we're not going to talk about that in this episode. Let's go to point number 2.
So it transitions super well, Alex, the point that you shared, and I'm just going to read it out loud. Health is not binary. It's neither A or B. It's neither either or. Eeyore,
Shout out to
baby.
Winnie the Pooh.
Dude, that's a phenomenal show. Talk about
Classic.
classic. All right, I'm going to restart this. Health is not binary. It's not either or, A or B, healthy or unhealthy. This would imply that health is a condition, meaning you either are or are not healthy. Instead, health is a spectrum. It exists on a continuum that fluctuates from season to season. Instead of being an either or condition, it's more like a pendulum that swings from beneficial to less beneficial behaviors. Why? Because your health is you. You cannot separate or exist separate from your health. I think this point just piggybacks super well on what we were just talking about, right? I mean, every area of our health is connected. But culture in the world talks about health as a condition. I'm healthy. I'm not healthy. Why are you not healthy? Well, I'm not working out or eating right. I don't feel my best.
Or my BMI is not under 20, whatever.
My weight's not exactly where I want it to be. All of these different reasons that people would come up and say that they aren't healthy or that they're unhealthy. The reality is, like, the health just exists, but it exists on a spectrum, just like you wrote, Alex.
Trevor, here at Holo Health, we are trying to redefine health with God's design of health. We're trying to take it back from just diet and exercise and really blow it up in a sense that, like, hey, health is bigger and better and broader than just diet and exercise. One way we do that is through our 9 correct understandings of what health is and that alignment with Scripture. One of those is that health is a spectrum. Health is not a condition. Health is not either or. Health is not all or nothing. We talk about misunderstandings. We talk about correct understandings, right? This is one of the correct understandings. Health is not a thing that you can either have or have not, like you just said. What happens is when we view it that way, we view it as black or white. We view it as binary, meaning it's an option. We either can or cannot. But in reality, your health is just a reality of you. It's just the state that you are in. And a lot of different factors play at this, whether you're physical, mental, emotional, relational, spiritual. Those are 1/5 of the pie, but they're not separate slices of the pie. Those are just constantly fluctuating back and forth to kind of average where you are at in general. So in the True Health program, Trevor, we actually have an entire diagram with these different points and talking about how it's a spectrum, but at the ends of the spectrum is the perfection of health and the absence of health. When it comes to the perfection of health, that is Jesus. That is why we're pursuing Jesus, because Jesus perfected health. We never will this side of eternity, but when we are constantly pursuing body, mind, and soul to align our behaviors with God's design, we're actually moving closer to what Jesus embodied in the Garden of Eden and actually here on earth. That is probably 60 seconds of like a 60-minute deep dive that we could do on the holistic pursuit of health for Jesus. But our encouragement is you're not healthy or unhealthy. You're not fit or fat. You're not either or. It's where are we in the season? Which area do we need to tend to? Because it's constantly fluctuating. It's not a pendulum, and it exists because you are your health. You cannot separate you from your health. It is you.
Yeah, great way to think about it, listeners, is there's either higher levels or more levels of health, or there's lower levels of health. There's not unhealth or health, just like Alex made that point. It's either lower levels of health or higher levels of health. That's an easy way to think about it, but you can visualize that spectrum that Alex is talking about. On the left side is like the total absence of health, being death. The far right side being perfection, perfect health, which is Jesus. Our goal is to continue moving on the right. But just like Alex said, you're going to have seasons. You have young children. You have a job change. You're traveling a ton. You're moving. It's so many different things that could cause that to shift, right? Maybe because you have all these things going on, you're not as consistent with your exercise or engaged in community as much. Whatever it might be, that's going to shift a little bit. But the value comes when you ask yourself that question: what area of my health needs attention? Because the goal is to not just do something because culture says. The goal is not to lift weights 3 to 4 times a week, do an aerobic session 2 to 4 times a week, and get your 10,000 steps. If your soul needs attention, you're not spending time with the Lord. The goal is not to do all those things if you're not engaged in community. Okay? The reality is you need to know what area of my health needs attention. If you're feeling this rub inside of your soul needs attention.
Yeah.
If you're feeling
Yeah.
kind of twisted and just easily frustrated, or just you can't understand these emotions that you're experiencing, your mind and emotions need attention.
Yeah.
The answer could be to go exercise or move, or maybe you could walk, but that doesn't mean that should be your default.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself, what is going on underneath the hood, to be able to make a purposeful action to move yourself on that spectrum. Or otherwise, you're just kind of improving an area that doesn't need improving, right? You're strengthening a strength rather than working on a weakness, quote unquote, if that makes sense.
And Trevor, here's to piggyback off of that. Here's a reality is that there's no neutral behaviors either. And this is scriptural. Either the behaviors or disciplines that we are engaging in are either taking us towards true health or taking us in the opposite direction. Because you go back to Romans 8, a mindset in the flesh or mindset in the spirit. There's no neutral ground. Everything is forming us. If you go into the teaching of spiritual formation, we are being spiritually formed. And not just spiritually formed, we are being physically formed. We are being mentally formed. We are constantly becoming someone. So that's why it's important to focus on some physical habits, some spiritual habits, some emotional habits, because if we don't, the cultural undertow will take us towards these non-health promoting behaviors, which is why we want to almost give us the best bang for our buck through the 7 habits of health. Those are the biggest needle movers of our pursuit of true health, because there's no neutral behaviors. We're either moving towards health or moving away from health, which is why health is a spectrum. It's constantly fluctuating depending on day by day, season by season, because every single behavior is either casting a vote for either or.
That's good. Listeners, be on the lookout for an assessment we're going to make available for you guys called the True Health Assessment. It's going to allow you to basically take a quiz and see what area of a truly healthy life do I need to work on? What area needs attention? So be on the lookout. We're going to be sharing that on social media. If you're not following us, better follow us. I don't know how you wouldn't be if you're listening to this episode, but I'm sure there's some people out there. Holo Health, just at Holo Health, HOLOHLTH. The question that we want to leave you guys with, this question is absolutely just a home run if you're a baseball fan, slam dunk if you're a LeBron James and basketball fan. Question number 3. This is one you need to stop and ask yourself today. Maybe even as soon as this episode's over, just turn the sound off, turn everything off, and just kind of process. Alex wrote this into 3 and 3. It's point 3. It says, if God answered every single one of your prayers this past week, would anyone else know? Would anyone else know? The premise, the underlying thought behind that question is, what are you praying for?
Yeah.
Are the things that you are praying for something that impact the lives of others, or are all your prayers about yourself? Are all your prayers self-centered? Or are your prayers about changing your state, your life? Alex, I'll let you speak a little bit of context into this question for listeners.
Yeah, Trevor, you hit it nail on the head. It's really not what are you praying for, but who are you praying for? That I'll just say it bluntly, that if your prayers are 100% selfish, you're not praying the prayers of the New Testament. That, yes, we are to pray for ourselves to surrender control so that God can meet our needs, so that he can use us, not for our own good, though. Yes, we want to shine the light, but for others, so that we can go into every nation, every community, every neighborhood, every work meeting, every Zoom call, every interaction, every conversation, and love them well. And this is going back to the core tenets of Holo Health again, Trevor, that we pursue our levels of health, not for our own doing, so that we can love other people better. The health is a means to an end. And part of our health is our time with Jesus, okay? That is a huge part of it. And in that time, am I using that to focus inward or outward? Am I focusing on that to love the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, only stopping there? Or am I doing that so that I can love my neighbors well? And that just comes down to motivation. It comes down to perspective. It comes down to outlook, and it comes down to pride of, man, over the past 7 days, if God answered every single one of my prayers by the snap of his fingers, would anyone else know? And how am I praying for them specifically? Because literally, the New Testament ethic, the kingdom of heaven's virtue, the movement that God instilled was not a individuality spirituality. It was not a you do you by yourself. He left his ecclesia, which is a gathering, a group, which is called the church, meaning we are the body of Christ. We are the group that Jesus left behind to go spread the good word, that we're to do that in relationship with one another, which means we're not just here by ourselves. We are to do life with and pray for and intercede and confess and all these things with one another, which is why one of the 7 habits of health, Trevor, is cultivating community, knowing deeply and vulnerably and getting real and being authentic and loving and being patient with one another, because that's how we change. That's how we're transformed in the image of Christ. That's how we overcome this unrepented sin that we're so ashamed for by ourselves, but a brother can come alongside us and help us through, because that is what God calls us to do. And that's why we increase levels of health so that we can. So the question is, who are we praying for? That is such a pivotal key part of health.
Yeah, listeners, your takeaway with that one is just to sit down and think about the people in your life that you could pray for. The first 5 people that come to your mind, write them down, and then schedule 5 minutes to pray for them.
Yeah.
Go for a walk to double down and habit stack, as they say.
Hey, really quick, 30 seconds. This inspired me. I'm not saying this is our main takeaway, but this rocked my world. And I was like, wow. I was listening to a podcast episode on fasting. Okay, if you're not familiar with fasting, it's just a spiritual discipline that you basically don't eat for a while so that you can surrender your desires, so that you can align them with God and actually all these things. Okay. And one mom said every Tuesday, all day, and primarily Tuesday during her lunch, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, she'd fast for 24 hours. During her lunch period, is during that 1 hour lunch, she prays for her kids for 60 minutes. And she's like, my desire for my kids to walk and know Jesus is greater than my desire to eat. And I was like, good grief. Man, I love a good Chipotle burrito or a Chick-fil-A sandwich. And I'm like, I desire those greatly. But do I desire that my kids come to know the goodness of God more than I love to eat that Chipotle burrito on a Tuesday afternoon? And it wrecked me. I was like, man, am I interceding and praying on behalf of my kids or other people as much as my desires are for other things? So this question just kind of came from like, man, am I putting my money where my mouth is? And am I praying, not just loving, but am I praying for them? So that inspired me, and maybe it'll inspire you too, but it was pretty cool, I thought.
Listeners, your main takeaways from this episode is, 1, to stop using the phrase spiritual life. Your life just exists as a whole.
Yeah.
Every part of you is your life. And Jesus is inviting you into something that engages all of your body, mind, and soul, every area of your life, just as he says in the New Testament. So ask yourself, God, how can I encounter God more in these things, these daily rhythms and things that I'm engaged in? The second point is to stop viewing your health as binary. It's not either or, it's a spectrum. Okay, there's either less health or greater health. So start to see that as you're making decisions, and then give yourself grace in season to season. And then the last point is really just ask yourself, if God answered my prayers, would other people know? Really start to unpack, who are 5 people that I can pray for? That's your takeaway. Who are 5 people that I can pray for? Write their names down. Write something down you can pray for them for, and do it. Because it matters, that their soul, that their health, it matters just like yours does. So, listeners, we love this episode. This is so much fun. I want to encourage you to check out the link below. We're going to link to the True Health program. Alex talked a little bit about the correct understandings in this context of this episode. We talked about the 7 habits of health a few times. You can learn more about those correct understandings, the 7 habits of health, and this mindset, paradigm shifting mindset when it comes to health, all for free inside of the True Health program. So I'm going to link that below for what you can click and learn a little bit more and access that program. And then, like I said, be on the lookout for an assessment that you can learn what area of your health needs attention. But as always, we're appreciative for you guys. We love you so much. And we'll see you on the next episode.
You're a legend.